ses foyers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers.
Just takes a second.
Okay, so welcome everybody to another lecture from the Rising Tide Foundation in the series A Harmony of Interests. That word that we chose as a theme, Cynthia and I, to launch this lecture series was taken from a very important book written by one of Lincoln's most interesting economic advisors, Henry C. Carey, who wrote this in the build-up to the Civil War. Because it was recognized by leading intellectuals within America as well as within Germany, Otto von Bismarck's Germany, within France, within Russia, and beyond, that the Civil War was much more than simply a war for secession within the American colonies. It was recognized that there was a clash between two paradigms, two opposing systems, and within this work by Henry C. Carey, who was a devout follower of Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Matthew Carey, his own father, and Ben Franklin. It was recognized that one of two systems was going to come out on top at some point soon. And that was a very pregnant moment where the idea of sovereign nation states defining their own use of credit through national banking procedures, protective tariffs, internal improvements, was one view, where value within the system emanated from not hedonistic standards like avoiding pain, pursuing pleasure, or some other form of hedonistic arbitrary desire, but rather from what are you building for the future? How is the money functioning for the benefit of your citizens, which would benefit all alike from every class. Yeah, so when a nation builds a system of infrastructure, transportation, water systems, things that benefit both the people but also the nation's power of productivity, everyone benefits. And so that was Henry C. Carey's approach to resolving the false problem of class struggle that was coming through certain channels in Germany. Around Karl Marx and Engels, that there would always be, an intrinsic opposition between the industrial class, the proletariat, and those who want to exploit the proletariat, and that tension was unresolvable. It was like a universal constant. And Henry C. Carey said no. So we defined our lecture series based upon that. The opposing view, the British system's view of free trade and monetarism, was always premised around the idea of basically money had its value because people wanted things and they wanted to buy low, sell dear. They wanted to maximize their pleasure. And really that was not a very viable scientific theory, but it was always promoted by the British establishment going back to the days of Lord Shelburne. The idea of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was always used to justify the idea that nations should not industrialize, should just stay cash cropping. America should just stay agricultural, so should Canada. So we have a whole series of lectures that we began a few weeks ago going through different elements of this process, how it began in the century before the American Revolution itself. What were the Cameralist French thinkers, the dirigists around Colbert, around Vattel and Leibniz, whose ideas later on inspired the networks around Ben Franklin. We did a class on why Quebec failed to accept the Ben Franklin Challenge in 1774. And we had a presentation by Anton Chaikin as well on some of the international networks going through the 19th century. Now, when approaching a new idea or a discovery in history or elsewhere, there's two ways of doing it. You could either do it by following the principle, seeing how the principle being acted upon shaped for the better human civilization, but you could also look at it from a negative proof. where did it fail to succeed? And you can learn a lot that way too. They obviously, both techniques should work together, and I think that today's presentation is going to take us through a little bit of an exercise into a period of history, which, speaking here as a Canadian, most Canadians don't get to learn very much about, not properly at least. And a lot of this has been scrubbed out of our history books. A lot of the records have been destroyed, lost consciously or not. That's up for debate. But Pascal, who is a very long-time friend and is a history professor, I think he's probably the first history professor who has taken the studies of the American system of characters like Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa and Leibniz to the Quebec High Arctic, where he's been teaching now, going on to his third year in native communities. So Pascal has studied this period of history extensively. It's a continuing bounty of new discoveries. Every single time you revisit it. And he's going to share with us some of the insights, some of the discoveries that he's made along the way, looking at a certain period of the early 19th century Canada, which was a very different thing from what we know of as today. So Cynthia and I here at the Rising Tide are just very, very proud that Pascal was able to come by and showcase some of his thoughts. And with that, Pascal, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. I just sent a message in the chat. I just want you people to know that I muted you, but I'll allow you by the end of my talk. It's not going to be a problem. We just had some echoes, so I just wanted to make sure that we would clear that out. So, all right. As I said, maybe before everybody was online, I'm really happy to be doing this presentation because I know some of you, but some of you I don't, and I intuit that you are living far away from Montreal, so that's actually a good thing because I'm not thinking that I'm going to be discussing a very well-known topic for people outside of Quebec, and even though here it's supposed to be taught in school, it's not also a very well-known subject, or it's actually it's yeah, you'll see, it's a funny one. It's a very funny one. But so I'm gonna introduce my slideshow right now, and sorry, it's the first time I do this, so it's gonna be maybe a bit hectic for a second. So here's the slideshow. You should be seeing 2 white stars and a blue on a blue background. Yeah, good. Okay. So I know I muted you, so you can't answer. Okay, so sorry about that. So for now on, my questions are going to be rhetorical, as I'm going to be answering them myself. All right. So you see 2 stars on a blue background. This is actually a flag that never existed, because the country it's supposed to represent never existed. It should have been the Republic of Canada, but as we know, it doesn't exist, not as of yet. So this flag was created around the time of what we call the rebellions in Quebec in 1837-38. So that's what we're going to be discussing. But I'm going to be, as you know, as maybe some of you have seen the previous classes and study history, as you know, we have to go back sometimes way before the time that we really want to study, because their actions, events, cause consequences, and usually you have to go back further and further to figure out what are the real causes of the problem that you're looking at directly. So hopefully this is going to work. There was a little animation on this slide, but I don't know if it's going to work. Ah, there you go. So actually, I titled my class "The Canada's Last Revolts." And we're going to be discussing more extensively the revolt that happened in Lower Canada. There was another one happening in Upper Canada, and I'm going to be mentioning things about it. But for the sake of time, because we want to go to sleep tonight, I'm not going to be touching on both. And I'm going to be touching actually very little on the fighting that happened, the armed fighting that happened in Lower Canada. But you see that there's an S on Canada. And that's because at the time there were two. At the time of the revolt that we're going to be looking at, the rebellions, there were two Canadas. And I'm going to explain to you how come, where did that come from? Because today we know there's one Canada. Or I should say there's one British North America. That's how I call it. So there's a quote underneath the two flags of the British, the Union Jack and the American flag, the Stars and Stripes, which says, "Certainly, before long, all of the Americas shall be governed by Republican institutions." That's a quote that dates from back in 1834, and it was said by Louis-Joseph Papineau, who was the leader. He was actually the Speaker of the House, the Lower Canada House of Assembly. And he was the leader, he was the chief of the Patriot movement, the leader of the Patriot movement. Or it was an actual party, the Patriot political party of Lower Canada. So let's get into this. First to start, well, as I said, we have to go back in time. And in school, in university, we discuss this matter because Quebec is a funny place. Quebec is in majority French speaking. And it's the only province still to this day which is like that in Canada, in the modern Canada that we know, or in the British North America that we know today. And so the historians like to have debates on different subjects, different topics, different moments in history. And they debate about the conquest. So you probably know that there was New France, and the British and the French were fighting. There was the what we call in America, it's called the French and Indian War, and in Europe they call it what's it called? It's the sorry, I'm blank right now, and I muted you all, so I can't. Yes, I know Jerry knows it. Okay, so sorry. I'm just going to go quick on this. But you need to know that historians have been debating if the conquest was actually
7 years
good.
war.
I'm sorry?
7 years war.
The 7 years war. Right. That's right. Because here it didn't last 7 years. Only lasted 5. So we don't call it like that. Anyway, well, it's a long debate. Anyway, so historians like to fight about things. And so historians have been debating if, whoops, not yet, if the conquest was a good thing. So two schools of historical thinking have been created back in the 1960s when Quebec was discussing, there was a question of addressing the identity crisis and the question of separating from Canada. Oh, thank you. That's really good. So two schools were created, basically one in Montreal and one in Quebec. The one in Montreal answered the question as to know, was the British conquest good or bad for the Canadian people, the French Canadians? They said, the Montreal school says no, it wasn't good because it basically destroyed the leadership. People went back to France, who were in governing situation. at the time before the conquest. And so it basically stripped the colony of its, commercial class and leadership. And the church really got, it got more power with that intervention. Even though it lost some, it gained some at the same time or a bit later. And so the economy was basically run by an oligarchy of British merchants. And so the French Canadians were mostly, as they called it, agriculturalists, or, they were basically farmers. And Laval school, which is based in Quebec, says no, actually, says yes, actually. The conquest was good because it allowed, the system of British rules to govern the Canadians and to have a constitutional government, a parliament, going towards democracy, and all this. And it protected the French Canadians because it allowed for certain rules to remain, which were there before. Okay, so this is the big debate that was going on into the historiography in Quebec in the past decades. Now, I'm going to say this is not actually the real debate. The real debate really happens about the rebellions. This is a real question because, well, I'm not going to go back to what Matthew has said because he did a presentation on 1774. And so you can go back to see his presentation and read what he wrote about that. So I'm not going to be touching so much on that today. But I'm saying, really, there's a key point to really understand the tragedy further is what we're going to be looking at, which are the rebellions of 1837-38. I'm going to be discussing much more the Lower Canada for sake of time, but I'm really thinking about doing a second class presentation and dig a bit more into the characters of what happened in Upper Canada. But for sake of time right now, I'm going to be discussing Lower Canada more extensively. So this is not the Montreal school, the Laval school, that's not the real issue. Because also, maybe some of you know this flag. It's not a very common flag. It's actually the flag of the French Canadians who migrated to, sorry, I'm going to let these people in. Oh no, there's chats. Okay, I see. So some of you may know this flag or not, but it's the French Canadian flag of the United States, or American people from French Canadian descent. And so if the issue was really to speak French, not that many French Canadians would have gone and established themselves down in the United States. So there was a real issue, which doesn't come just from the fact that they were farmers or the fact that they were ruled by British people and that they wanted to speak French. So I just thought it was an interesting thing to bring in because we're going to be discussing this question of political identity a bit more later. So that's the French Canadians in the United States, or Americans from French Canadian descent. All right, next slide. So just to recapitulate, this was New France in blue at the time in 1750. Very scarcely populated, but very wide territory. And you see the 13 colonies in red. In orange, you have the Spanish territories, and the rest, which is kind of in purple, is also British possessions at the time in 1750. So that's at the time of the conquest, just a bit before. Now we're going to be looking at the anatomy of the colony. the British North America. So happens the conquest, all right. And happens the Quebec Act. So just to refresh your mind on this, the Quebec Act, if you look at Quebec at that point, the Quebec Act, the map that's on your left, you see that in 1774, the territory is actually very, very big. And it actually was expanded at that time. Before, the province of Quebec was really just a small rectangle in the St. Lawrence Valley. And in 1774, the British authorities saw that the Americans were, well, the British colonies down south, the 13 colonies, were getting excited. And so they decided we're going to actually try to keep the 13 colonies, but also keep Quebec from joining them, trying to really divide and conquer. As you know, it didn't work for the American colonies because, well, the 13 colonies were able to establish their independence, with the war, 1776 to 83. But Quebec stayed. And again, you can go watch, see what Matthew has said on this. Very interesting. So you see that the Quebec Act at the time expanded the territory and made sure that the French Canadians could actually continue living basically under the laws which they were living in when it was a French system. So they were not prejudiced on the religion, and they could actually become part of the civil servants, even though there were restrictions, but it was feasible. So and the Catholic Church was actually able to impose tithes or fees. I think it's basically collecting money from people, so to maintain the church. So so Quebec then joined the 13 colonies. All right, now 1791. Well, after the American Independence War, a lot of loyalists decided to move to the other British colonies. So they moved into Canada, into the province of Quebec at the time, and but after a while, so 1783 to 1791, a lot of petitions were sent to London, and they were asking, the loyalists were asking for, to live under a real British system as they knew it before. And so eventually the British government said, okay, we're going to do that. We're actually going to separate what's remaining of Quebec, and we're going to create two separate provinces. So now you have Upper Canada and Lower Canada that you see on the map in red. And it's not exactly the British system as they knew it, but it was an attempt to actually appease the loyalists, which went to live mostly in Upper Canada. So Lower Canada was still in vast majority French speaking. So it didn't really change that much the demographic. A little bit, but not that much, because it separated the colony in two. So Upper Canada, mostly, English speaking, and Lower Canada, French speaking, and living under the same laws that they had before. Now, the context, if you think about 1800, what is the context for North America and actually and South America? We're going to be looking at this a little bit. But so you have the map. So now everything that's up north, as you can see, is ruled by the British. And underneath, you still have Louisiana, which is French territory, which is going to be bought by the United States very soon, in 1803, I believe, or so. And the United States, and after that, you have New Spain, ruled by Spain. So this is North America in 1800. But there's going to be a lot of things going on after that. So we're looking at revolutions. Revolutions are happening a lot at the beginning of the 1800s. So first of all, you have 80. I probably didn't put all of them. I tried to do, to search, but things are very hectic between 1808 and 1833 in South America. So I didn't really do all of the checks because things change names and change sides very quickly. But for what I could understand, starting in 1808, you have the Grand Colombia, which is created. 1811, Paraguay, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Peru, El Salvador, Brazil, Bolivia, and Uruguay. So a lot of countries, a lot of colonies become countries at that point in the beginning of the 1800s. And I know that Jerry's going to be talking about 80 soon, so I'm not going to be talking about that now. So, but it's just for you to have a little sneak peek at what's going on at the time. And so that's for the revolutions in the Americas at the time. But there's also revolutions going on in Europe. And so you have France, obviously, that you all know about. 1789 to 1799, basically the revolution's going on with ups and downs, and eventually going into an empire with Napoleon. So anyway, that's what happened. There was an attempt of revolution in Ireland, which failed in 1798. And then there were many uprisings in the 1820s, Spain, Italy, Portugal, the Greek War of Independence, and the revolutions that happened in 1830. Well, you have a plethora of them. So this is all going on at the beginning of the 19th century. So imagine living in a world where revolutions are happening like every 10 years. there's new countries popping up and being created, and fights being waged against imperial powers. So this is the world which you're living in. And it's going to give some ideas to the inhabitants of the two Canadas. And that's what we're going to be discussing later. But so the important events that you have to keep in mind also, and I didn't really exactly stretch until 1849. We're going to see that after. I kind of divided this from the conquest till the rebellions, and we're going to be discussing after the rebellions a bit later. But so you have the French and Indian War, which we said was the 7 Years' War in Europe. You have the Quebec Act, which is going on in 1774. We've seen that. The Americans actually invade the province. That was probably touched by Matt. I don't remember exactly. But you know that Ben Franklin was in Montreal and trying to organize French Canadians to join the revolution. So that was in 1775. Then you have the American War of Independence and the British-American War, which was, celebrated by the Harbour government big time in here. Even though people don't really understand exactly what was going on, but it was kind of like a second independence war for the United States. And the British really tried to destroy, Washington and burn the Constitution. Washington, D.C., that is. Anyway, that's for a separate presentation. But 1815, what's interesting there? Okay, so now we're back in Lower Canada, and you have Louis-Joseph Papineau, who's chosen as the Lower Canada House Speaker. He's going to be House Speaker from 1815 until 1836, with really just small interludes where basically he was sent in London. Oh, and I see that actually. Sorry, I kind of compose it in French and in English, but sometimes I didn't really translate everything. So 1822-23, that's what's going on. There's a mobilization, and Papineau is actually sent with John Nielsen, who's actually also, he's an Anglophone from Montreal, same writing as Papineau, and same party. and they are sent to London to actually bring a petition, which was signed by around 60,000 people at the time, calling for to stop the union of Upper and Lower Canada. There was an intention coming from the Montrealers. They were called like that. The Montrealers are basically the commercial elite of Montreal, but also of Quebec, but mainly based in Montreal, so therefore called the Montrealers. All around, you know, the Bank of Montreal, around the fur trade, and the wood logging industry also eventually. So basically, they are the one running the show, and having a big time living in a French-controlled environment. Because in 1791, what's happening, and I wanted to mention that before, but we're going to see it in a diagram fairly soon. What happens is that you have an assembly which is created. So before 1791, there were no real elections in the Canada. There was no assembly where people could be elected. So in 1791, you have the first elections. And so now people can vote for candidates, and it's a first. So in 1822, what's going on is that basically there's an intention to say that, you know, the votes of people, even though there's a majority voting on one side and wanting, you know, one thing, we should be able to reverse that by creating a new majority. And that's part of the intention, to keep British North America British, and try to basically get rid of the influence of the patriot movement, which is building at the time. It was created first in the beginning of the 1800s, 1804, I believe. The Canadian Party is created, and it's going to become the Patriot Party soon. So there's an intention to destroy that at that point in 1822-23 and create a union of Upper and Lower Canada. The people of Lower Canada are not very happy about this, and they will win a big election in 1834. You know, I'm just stressing like big events right now. I'm not exactly going into all the details. There's a lot, but you know, for sake of time, I think this is the most interesting. So 1834, there was almost a landslide election for the Patriot Party. And so they were able to vote 92 resolutions, which was a document adopted in the House Assembly and sent to London. All right, so the 10 Russell's resolutions were basically a big no to all the 92 resolutions, which were asking for, you know, kind of a more democratic system, because you're going to see soon, I'm going to show you basically, not this one, but this one. This is the 1791 Act, also called the Constitutional Act. And in red, you can see everything that's being controlled by the British. And it's really the British because it's all named, people are appointed. They are not elected, but they are appointed by the British Foreign Office, basically. So these are all agents of the British Empire that are running the colonies of Upper Canada and Lower Canada, the same. Well, it's almost the same system. There's little you know, tiny bits that are different, but it's pretty much what you see. So the blue and the orange are the only thing that are, you know, elected that you can actually vote for. But all the decisions are being made by really the Legislative Council and the Executive Council, which are appointed by the governors or the lieutenant governor of each colonies. So that's the system that, you know, people are trying to fight against. And that's the idea. You know, maybe it kind of worked in 1791, even though, well, you know, think about it. You have the American Revolution happening almost 10 years, you know, more, well, during the 10 years before. And so you have that kind of system created to maintain a colony, which is partly French and partly British or English in essence. And this is going to create real problems because eventually people from the French descent will say that, well, they have been British subjects since they were born because conquest happened in, you know, 1760, 1560. So they were born under the British system, so they are British subject, right? And also, on the other side, in Upper Canada, well, people are from British extraction, or they were in the 13 colonies and decided to leave because they were not okay with the idea of independence from the British crown. So they are British in essence too, right? So that causes a problem after a while because people are not being elected. People that are making decisions are not the ones being elected. They are named. They are appointed. So this becomes a big problem because you have the American Republic down south, and you have all of the revolutions, which, you know, were mentioned before, that are happening at the same time, you know, at the beginning of the 19th century. So how do you actually cope with that? Because the system has been the same since 1791. It hasn't changed. This is just basically another representation of the same system. So you see, basically, there's an elite, an oligarchy, which is run from the British government, appointed from the British government, and coming to Upper Canada and Lower Canada to basically govern them, control them. And so this is the strategy at the time of the British Empire. They gave some things to the French with the Quebec Act, which remains in the 1791 Act, and they gave the 1791 Act for the Loyalists who wanted to have a House of Assembly. So that's it. Everybody should be happy, right? Not quite. And you see, I just wanted to give you, this is our flag at the time. This is, you know, pretty much tells you what it is. So during, at the time of the rebellion, that was the flag that was used for the colonies. So you see, all of the governors which are sent to Lower Canada, for that example, are, you know, sirs. They're counts. They're well-established people. You know, they come from the right families, and so they are sent to Canada to govern, to rule for the British crown. And on the right-hand side, I gave you all the British monarchs, and, you know, since 1791, or yeah, 1791, even before that. Anyway, so the population. Let's see that a little bit, because that's important to see too. That's a variable which the British crown and the governors will use against the population of both Canada's. They will try to wage, you know, the divide and conquer tactic because of the population. They will try to band on one side or the other, depending on who's the majority. And so they will try to help the elite, the church in Lower Canada, control the people and basically give them the direction to follow. And that's for Lower Canada. And Upper Canada, they will deal with the oligarchy there also. So in Lower Canada, the oligarchical clique is called La Clique du Château, because there was a castle in Quebec called the Castle St. Louis, And that's where basically the governor resided. So everything that had to be decided was decided there. So they called it the oligarchy of the castle, basically, because people knew that, you know, that's where their lives were being ruled from. And in Upper Canada, they called it the family compact, called it like that. That was the oligarchy which was running Upper Canada. So that's who the governor had to be friends with, because the governors, you know, they were coming from England, from the mainland, and but the oligarchies were from the land. They were from Upper Canada, so they had to deal with that. That's from 1806 to 1841. What's interesting to see there is that I stopped there, but in 1850, basically the population of Upper Canada is higher than the population of Lower Canada, and we're going to see that if you actually put the two together, if you have more British loyalists, well, then you win every vote, if that's who you're counting on. So Lower Canada was the assembly was always pretty much run by French people, which was the majority. Sometimes more for the British interest, but also, well, most of the time that irritated the oligarchy was when they were not on the side of the British crown. And so that's interesting to keep in mind. You know, things are moving at that point. The population is growing. Now, what's the plan? Well, I kind of, you know, already gave you the plan. It's always been divide and conquer, but that's not really new for the British Empire. It's for all empires. That's what we have to understand. They really wanted to block the American influence, especially the American influence. Sometimes they will say that it's the French influence, the Jacobins and this and that, anarchistic tendencies, whatever. There's few references, but most of the references which you see in the newspapers and in the speeches of the Patriot movement leaders at the time are really coming from the American Republic, the American example. So what is the plan? That's a quote. Okay, I forgot to put the date, but that's around the 1790 deal. William Wyndham Grenville was the Home Secretary in England, and he was well, the cousins of, he was cousin with William Pitt the Younger, who was the Prime Minister at the time. So he writes, Lord Guy Dorchester was here in, I believe, in Upper Canada at the time. He says, I am assured that it be a wiser politic to concede in advantageous circumstances favors we see fit and can correctly establish the ways and means for their application, instead of waiting for them to be imposed against our will. So I think that's been really the policy which ran the colony here, was that we're going to give things that we think are okay for the moment. We're going to give them instead of having revolts and having people rebel against the authority. We're going to give them some, you know, tiny bits, and then they'll keep quiet and they won't go with the Americans. That's actually, it was kind of hard to translate. That was a French quote I translated to go back to the English. I have yet to find the exact English quote. Sorry for that. I hope it's understandable. So that's a policy of the British Empire. We're going to give them a bit of what they want, because that's actually what we want for them. And now we're going to get into a bit more quotes. Maybe I'm going to ask Matt to read some quotes. Could you read this one just in a second? So if you want to have a revolution, the real, a real important factor is communication. Not just talking, but at the time, being able to travel to go places. So this next quote is from, I think it was a book which comes from a thesis. And it was written at the beginning of the 20th century. And it pretty much gives you an idea of how the British were trying to run the colony and how they were really trying to make sure that it would not look south because it wouldn't have the means to do that. So Matthew, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. You are no doubt aware of the inquiries which have been made in the province as to the practicability of leaving in a state of nature that part of the frontier which lies between Lake Champlain and Montreal. I must confine myself, therefore, to instructing you to abstain altogether from making hereafter any grants in those districts, and to use every endeavor to induce those who have received grants there and have not yet proceeded to the cultivation of them, to accept uncleared lands in other districts more distant from the frontier of the United States.
There's more.
It is also very desirable that you should, as far as lies in your power, prevent the extension of roads in the direction of those particular districts beyond the limits of that division of the province referred to in the plan of the Surveyor General as being generally cultivated. And if any means should present themselves of letting those which have been already made fall into decay, you will best comply with the views of His Majesty's government and materially contribute to the future security of the province by their adoption.
All right. So I hope you got that. That's a letter from that was sent from Lord Bathurst, who was in charge of the colonies, to Sir J.C. Sherbrooke, so basically the governor of Lower Canada at the time in 1816. So that's the plan, We're going to give them what they want because that's what we want for them for now. And but we're going to make sure that they don't talk to anybody and don't get any bad ideas. So we're going to be isolating them big time. So no roads, nothing was to be built going south to the United States. Nothing was to be developed. So basically, the British were running the land. They had a British, called the Canadian Land Company, which would give land to mostly to immigrants, and would basically just run the whole system, just the whole land. And basically, they would not really develop anything. They would speculate on the land, but it wouldn't really be for internal development. That was not the idea. The idea was really to keep people around the St. Lawrence Valley and keep them as farmers. If we're thinking about the French Canadians at the time. So that's pretty clear. We talked about the 1822 Union Project. There's a lot more that could be said about it. But now what's really interesting us is what really happened when Papineau went in London, because he went with a petition and they had a large part of the population which had signed the petition. And so eventually it got blocked. The Union Project failed at the time in 1822-23. And Papineau meets with Lord Bathurst at the time, who's still there. He's a Secretary of State for the colonies, still there and still powerful in 1822. And that's a quote, that's the discussion. Basically, it's what Papineau says about his meeting with Bathurst when he's in exile in France. He writes that many years later, almost 2 decades later. But that's what he brings to the population, to basically show, you know, how the British really, they had a plan. They already had a plan, not just the Montrealers, but the British oligarchy had a plan. I don't know if he exactly understood the whole scope of the plan. That's debatable. But he understood that it would prevent development for the population of Lower Canada and Upper Canada. And so let's read the quote. It's going to be clearer. So I'm going to read it. I convene, said to me Lord Bathurst, that for Continental, the regime of which you complain can only be a period of stormy transition and morbid evolutions that must be followed for the people which are submitted to it by serene days and a normal organization of political life and national independence. Wow, okay. I even believe that the times of test will be short for you, French Catholics, governed by English Protestants. Your position is forced. It must be well recognized. It goes against nature. You are too far away from England to appreciate it well, and too close to the United States of America not to be dazzled by their misleading prosperity. I thus ask of you only 25 years of patient resignation. All right, just wait a little bit. It's gotta get better. But as a statesman, I foresee and predict before the end, that's still Bathurst talking, before the end of this period, great conflicts between the various parts of the American Confederation. England would then be ready to grant the colonies, which would have remained faithful to her and to her independence and institutions, better than those which are based on the Federative Pact. Indeed, released from any counterweight, democracy would be impetuous and anarchistic, while it would be the best of possible governments if it were moderated by a hereditary magistrature, whose perpetuity would be ensured in its glare and its strength by the means of majora and substitutions. It is clearly understood that the English government would grant these majora to influential men like you, sir, if they wanted to take part of such a wise arrangement. By giving your support to this plan, and by making your compatriots welcome it, you would hasten the era of happiness and power for your country. We would attract in it the rich families of England, which are friends of hereditary institutions, and those rich families of the United States, who are disgusted by the weak influence which the democratic ascendancy leaves to them. Wow. And now you have the answer, what Papineau mentions that he said to Lord Bathurst at the time. Maybe Cynthia, could you read it?
Yeah, sure. I answered Lord Bathurst that my utopia different from his and appeared to me all at the same time to be more desirable and more realizable, that the American Confederation would in the future be one and indivisible, that it appeared to me to go towards aggregation and growth rather than towards mutilation and impotence, that on the day of our independence, the right of common citizenship and free trade between Quebec and New Orleans, Florida, and the Hudson Bay would ensure Canada an undetermined but long period of peace, conquests on nature, progress in moral, political, and industrial sciences with individuality for each sovereign state, under the protection of the Congress, which could not become tyrant, having neither subjects nor colonies, and having attributions only in questions of peace and war with foreigners and foreign trade. I added that such advantages were too great and too manifest for Canada to let itself be intertwined in offensive and defensive alliances with England against America, and that as for this 25 years deadline fixed by himself, Lord Bathurst, it would certainly be shortened by the partiality of the metropolis, the incompetence of its decisions, and the corrupt practices of its agents. Lord Bathurst promised reforms. None were carried out. The time is up.
All right. So that's what Papineau says. That was published in France when he was exiled. That was after the rebellions failed. But so, in you know, this is quite interesting to think about. The British knew that there was a problem, but they would not address it before the United States was really destroyed altogether. And that's what Bathurst was actually very keen to explain to Papineau at the time. So Papineau, you know, is mentioning it, maybe, you know, I don't know. It's at the time he mentions it, it's too late. But that gives us an idea of how things were played in the colonies and in London by those who were in charge. I'm going to skip a few slides because I don't want to take too much of your time. And, you know, it's just, we could go on for a long time on these things. But I wanted to present to you the American leadership at the time. I could have colored them, maybe colored code for you, but, you know, we'll go through them a bit quick. The idea is to see that, you know, there's, as mentioned by, by Anton in his great book, Treason in America, after the American revolutions, you had traitors. You had people who tried to basically destroy the Republic. And they were partly successful at the time of Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren. They really tried to destroy the system of the national banking, the national banking system. But you also had great presidents like John Quincy Adams, who were trying to develop more fully the idea of a republic and with internal developments. And you know, maybe if the rebellions had been happening before the 1830s, maybe the United States would have been on the side of the patriots or helping even more. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And so you see that in 1837, you have Andrew Jackson, who's the president of the United States. And really, it's going to be Martin Van Buren who's going to be there to basically put laws into effect to stop any American citizen from helping the rebellion in Upper and Lower Canada. So the American leadership at the time was not necessarily too keen on having a revolution up north. And you had a major economic crisis happening in 37 also in the United States. So that was a major thing. So I'm not saying it's just bad timing, though. That's not just the issue. It's not just bad timing, and we didn't have a revolution in Upper and Lower Canada. That's not the idea. But clearly, it could have helped. So that was the American leadership at the time. So we talked about British liberties a little bit. I'm going to be going fast on this, but you know, we were discussing the idea that, you know, are you a British subject because you pledge allegiance to the crown, or are you a British subject because you were born British? And that's something which is going to be played against the Lower Canadians and also the Upper Canadians, because Upper Canadians might be speaking English, but if they were not born in the mainland, they're really just North Americans who say they're British, but that's not really enough. So that is being played by the oligarchy, big time, and it's going to be played in Upper Canada and in Lower Canada to try to get people divided on whether they think they are British because they believe it or because they were born as, like their blood. So make it a racial issue. And that's also what the Durham report talks about, to see that, it's a racial issue. But that's, I'm just going to let it, I'm just exposing it to you. Maybe in the question and answer period, we can talk about it a bit more. But I feel like I don't want to drag too long on these, because it was not a racial issue. It was not a linguistic issue. You had people in Lower Canada and Upper Canada who wanted to establish a republic, or what they thought was, Republican institutions at the time, based on the American system, or what they perceived of the American system. So, quote unquote, more democratic. And so the Canadian Party, which was the party of the French Canadian, becomes a patriot party. And there's not only French Canadians in it, but there's also, you have Irish people, especially the Irish Catholics, because they were segregated in Ireland and they are still segregated in Lower Canada. And so they actually find common ground. And you can think that there's actually, the 1798 attempt of rebellion in Ireland, is also part of that legacy that they have. So actually, Papineau was the leader of the Patriot Party, but his second in command was an Irish man called Edmund Bailey O'Callaghan. And so, I mean, if it was really a racial issue, I don't think that the Irish would have helped the French Canadians. And it's not an ethno-linguistic fight either, because a lot of them will go and live in the United States. Not just at the time of the rebellion, but even much after. So it's not really about language, about, these kind of issues. It's really, are we going to have a government that takes care of people and develops the country, or what? What is this all about? Okay, so we talked about the leadership. I'm not really gonna, go too long on this, but you have Papineau on the left, and you have William Lyon Mackenzie on the right. They were the leaders of the Patriot parties in Upper and Lower Canada. Papineau was a lawyer. He was actually brought into the Legislative Council at a certain point, the one which is appointed by the Crown, by the agents of the Crown, but he actually didn't stay long in there. And he really just, in certain way, liked to be elected by the people and represent them. And so he was the Speaker of the House and tried to bring forth all of the petitions. Because at the time, around the War of 1812, Papineau is actually a chief of the militia in Lower Canada. So he fights the Americans. He fights during the British and American War of 1812. He fights against the United States. So he's actually pro-British, much more at the time. But with different problems in the internal politics, with the different, obviously when you have an appointed, political system, people are not, don't have to ask questions to the population. they can just take the money if they see fit, basically. So you have a lot of corruption, you have a lot of bribes, you have a lot of problems, and that's where, you know, Papineau in the legislative, no, in the House Assembly, tries to bring petitions and tries to basically say, well, look, we are also subjects of the crown, and we should be treated as equals. So it shouldn't be just a question of origin, of race, but it should be a question of institutions. And so we want the same institutions. Now, problem is, you know, we're a colony, so we're not exactly Westminster. You know, the House Assembly of Lower Canada is not Westminster. It's not the same thing exactly. But that's what they want. They want to be equal, and they want the House Assembly to have pretty much the same power. So they make it a question of allegiance. So they say, if we are loyal to the crown, therefore we should have the same rights and privilege as any subject of the crown. And that's also what Mackenzie says in Upper Canada. That's what they're fighting for. They say either we're equal or basically, well, Mackenzie is a bit rougher. He says, you know, we're going to become independent. We don't have to be loyal to you anymore. It breaks our bond. And we've seen that, you know, the American independence, you know, when they declare independence in the declaration, that's basically what they say. They say, you know, we were with you until, you know, you decided to break the bond. And now we can become independent because it's your fault. That's kind of the same strategy that will be used in Lower and Upper Canada. But for this time, we're going to look at Lower Canada a bit more. So the conflict is brewing. And so in 1832, you have by-elections in Montreal. And whoops, I forgot to, I'll clean that up. If you want to have the PowerPoint after that, I'll clean everything that's in French. Anyway, so British soldiers fire on the civilians, and they killed 3. So that's around the election booths. The British soldiers fire, and that's really a big electroshock at the time. There's also different problems, economic problem at the time in the colony. There's an epidemic of cholera that's going on. So things are not looking good at the time. 1834, there's an election, and the Patriots win 78 of the 84 seats. So they are really the majority. And that's when the 92 resolution happened, which we discussed a bit earlier. These are basically resolutions to ask equality. Basically, you know, you could say, quote unquote, a more democratic system. But really, they want to share the British system as if they were, you know, subjects in Britain. But they are subjects in the French, in the colony in North America. Whoops, one sec. Not so fast. 1836, Adam Thom was really a character on its own. He's a journalist at the Montreal Herald, and he creates the Doric Club. So things get really nasty at that point. Already you had, you know, British soldiers firing on people at elections booth, but now you have actually paramilitary groups which are being created, and on both sides. So you have the Sons of Liberty, which is a clear reference to the American Revolution. And these young men are basically the ones that, and you think about it, well, if you're going to be fired at or clubbed or, you know, attacked when you're going for elections, you need people to protect you, in a sense, you know. And that's the system at the time, because it's not secret ballot. So you go and you vote, but you raise your hand and you say, I'm voting for this guy. And, you know, might be that some people are waiting for you at the door and telling you, you know, I think you voted for the wrong guy. And that's how things were done at the time. So things get really nasty, and violence kind of erupts a bit everywhere. And people are just leaders of the Patriot Party are arrested for no reason, just arrested. You know, that's it. Somebody asked for you to be arrested, and that, you know, so we're going to do it. So things are very chaotic, and the Patriot Party tries to bring forth different bills in the assembly, but everything is always rejected because, you know, the executive and the legislative council are you know, run by appointees of the governor. So nothing really moves, and they're calling on London to help. And so the 1992 resolutions are sent, and in 37, in March, John Russell replies with his resolutions and the 10 resolutions. And he says basically, well, you know, of the 92 resolutions, none of the above. Thank you very much. Have a good day. So it's pretty much a big slap to the movement, which was really like a parliamentary movement up until there. They just wanted to kind of figure it out through the institutions and try to be good subjects. But really now it's getting too far. And so between May and November of 1837, you're going to have dozens of public meetings that are going to be set up, and resolutions which are going to be passed and adopted at that point by the vote there, by, you know, by going and telling people what happened in Parliament and saying, well, so this is what we want to do, and, you know, are you okay with it? And people, you know, will rally around Papineau and the leaders of the Patriot movement. But that's going to be declared, obviously, as you know, treason by the British elite. So the leaders are going to have to move quick or flee, actually, not to be arrested. That's really what's going on at the time. They are seen as seditious, treasonous. The biggest assembly is the Assembly of the Six Counties. We're going to be going fast now. You don't necessarily see it so well because it's kind of faded, but the inscriptions on the white signs or flags there are Our Canada before everything else. The 92 resolutions, for the 92 resolutions, Down with the Tyrants, Death to the Traitors, Freedom or Death, and Hail to France, or Vive la France. And you see on the lower hand side, lower right hand side, you see the flag of France. You see another flag in the middle, we're going to get to in just a second, and you see the American flag. So, you know, obviously this painting was not done at the time of the rebellions. It was done in 1890. But it does reflect what we know from the speeches that were held at that meeting at the Assembly of the Six Counties. This is really a breaking point because Papineau at that time has a policy of boycott. So he says, and as you know, as you've seen the first quote I gave in this document, he says in 1834 that before long, all of the Americas should be governed by Republican institutions. And so now we're in 1837, and he's talking to people, and he's saying we need to continue the boycott policy. That's how the Americans started, and they have their republic now. If we do the same as them, we shall get to the same results. Well, that's a bit, you know, simplified, It's a bit simplistic, but in essence, that's really what he was saying. There's quotes from him saying exactly that. It's not so simple. Problem is that in the Patriot Party, you also have people who want independence and independence now. And so you have the Nelson brothers, and Wilfred Nelson was also a big character in the Patriot Party. And that's where at the Assembly of the Six Counties, he's going to give a speech right after Papineau. But in his speech, he's going to say, well, you should take your spoons and turn them into bullets. That's what we need right now. And so you see that that's a totally different position. Whereas Papineau is saying, we have to continue, we have to get people behind us, and we have to get boycott and a policy that's going to be organizing the population here for its own advantage. And on the other side, you have Nelson, but from the same party, who says, no, it's time for, to have a war. Unfortunately, Papineau is not going to prevail on them, and there's going to be shots fired, and then everything is, you have to go all in, basically. Otherwise, there's no return back, basically. You can't go back. That's it. So that's what's going to happen. I just wanted to mention quickly the flag that you saw in the painting, the one on top there, the green, white, and red. The green is for the Irish. The white is for the French, because yes, white was actually the color of the French king. And red is for the British. So this is the idea of the union of all ethnic groups, basically in Lower Canada. So that was the flag that was created in the 1830s for the Patriot Party. And the second one is one that was also found in different rallies. It's called the flag of Saint-Eustache. Anyway, I'm not going to take too much time on this. And the lower one, well, you saw this, the first thing you saw in this presentation. It was to be the flag of the Republic of the Canadas, but it never happened. So that's it. The battles happen. So now, as you know, it's too late to go back. So gunshots are fired, and things have to go on. And it's going to be a disaster for the Patriots because, well, there's no backing from the United States, or very, not officially from the government. And there's never going to be any support really from the government. There's going to be only support coming from people, across the border in Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. That's where there's going to be support for the lower and upper Canada rebellions. But it's just too small, and people are not really well armed. It kind of looks cool, that painting, that representation looks nice, but it kind of shows that, there's superiority in terms of number from the British side, but also when you look at the Patriots on the right-hand side, it's not exactly accurate because not everybody had guns. So they would go and they would fight with whatever they had, and they would lack guns and powder and bullets and everything. So they were not very well supplied. So it was kind of foolish to actually go that way at that time. The pressure was on, but really, what Nelson did at that meeting, I think, is very was a suicidal call. And I want to discuss more of him in the next presentation, because I think there's things that need to be said. Unfortunately, also, as you know, under the lockdown, it's hard to get to libraries and social places where they have books. So I just add a list of books that, you know, I looked into in the past, but not having them with me right now was kind of hard to actually develop all of the different aspects of this presentation. But I'm thinking, you know, second presentation will be better, hopefully. So these are the battles. In green are the victories, and in red are the defeat. So you kind of see, you know, what happens in Lower Canada. That's just for Lower Canada. I'm skipping Upper Canada. Sorry about that. So this is for 1837. And you see basically where things are happening. So that's basically in Saint-Denis, the first victory, then Saint-Charles defeat, Saint-Eustache defeat. And at the time, Papineau is leaving Montreal to get to Saint-Hyacinthe. And then from Saint-Hyacinthe, he's going in the US and then later on in France. So he's leaving. He cannot stay because basically there's a price on his head. All of the leaders of the Patriot Party at the time are, you know, to be found and imprisoned for treason. So he has to leave. That's the Battle of Saint-Eustache. All right. It happens in the church, really. They start outside, but eventually the Patriots get stuck in the church or the presbytery at the time, and the British have their cannons. The Patriots didn't have any cannons. So really, good luck. And so everybody was, well, everybody. Actually, I don't remember. It was a massacre, let's just put it like that. Like, not a lot of people in that church came out alive. So it was a complete defeat. And that was the end for 1837. People who left, the Patriots who left Lower Canada to go in the United States decided to come back and try to have a second uprising, continue what they had started. And, you know, again, in red are the defeat, and the one in blue is because it wasn't exactly a victory, but it wasn't a defeat. The Patriots were able to actually steal a boat, so they were able to do that. But that didn't save anything. It didn't save the day. So basically, on November 9th, at the Battle of Odelltown, everything ends. The rebellion is over. And so that's it for the Lower Canada Rebellion. The consequences are bad. There's actually, well, yeah, we could talk about that maybe later, but there are consequences also in Upper Canada. More people are going to be hung in Upper Canada. I forget exactly the number. There's 12 who are going to be hung in Lower Canada, but there's more in Upper Canada. 108 are going to be put on trial because now, you know, habeas corpus doesn't exist. It's a martial court. It's a military regime. Everything is suspended. 58 Canadians are going to be, French Canadians are going to be exiled. I think there's 1 or 2 Americans in that 58. They're going to be sent to Australia. Yeah. And, you know, one of the effects of this rebellion is going to be that the Catholic Church actually gains more power. It had power that the British had given them, but now it's going to have even more power. And so people who said that the French Canadians were kind of backward because they were following the church and were farmers and did whatever the church said, well, that's not going to help at all, because the church is going to have even more power over the institutions after the rebellion. Because, well, you know, the Patriot Party doesn't exist anymore. It cannot exist. It's banned. So it's a major setback, and it's going to bring in what is called la survivance, which is the idea of the survival of the French Canadians in the historiography. Yeah, I'm not going to discuss that too much right now. February 1839, Lord Durham, who was appointed and came to Lower and Upper Canada, writes a report, and it's published in 1839. And mostly when you have historic classes, basically they're going to say, well, and that's what defined the future of Canada, because, well, the two colonies were joined after that with the Union Act. And so, what was planned in 1822 and even earlier than that was finally accomplished. So everybody was happy, and we had responsible government 8 years later. So everybody would be happy. So that's just a representation of how they would do the hanging at the time. That was in Montreal at the prison, just next to the old harbor. And so 2, 5, 12. That's it. 12 were hung, and before I said 58 were exiled. So this gives you the date when it happened. So it kind of happened quickly after that. So it was, they didn't have a big trial. It was just, we were part of the rebellion. That's it. You're done. And how's it taught today? Well, it's, the American influence on the rebellion is more discussed nowadays, but not really so much openly, more like in the historian circles. It's more for historians and people who like history. In class, when I look, I try to look at the different curriculum, how it's being done in the system, in our school system. It's being taught in grade 7 in Ontario, the rebellion and what it was, but obviously they don't really discuss the idea of a republic so much. They try to bring it more into focus of, what happened after, and, because the victors write history, well, whatever happened after was good and was fine. So the Union Act, great thing. The responsible government, which is not really what was wanted by the people, is granted in 1848. The idea of a responsible government, basically, in a nutshell, because I want to end this class now, get you to ask questions. The idea is to have a government which is mostly elected, or that you can change the government once in a while, have elections and this and that. But if you really look at the system right now that we have, the British system is not a Republican system. It's never been, and it's never will until there's a real revolution. So that's not what the Patriot movement, the Patriot Party, wanted in Upper or in Lower Canada. But that's what we're taught today. So it's kind of hard to understand that there was this possibility, and that's what was discussed by Papineau and Mackenzie at the time. But nowadays, we don't really discuss so much their speeches. It's almost not really, we don't really discuss the characters, the different leaders. We just discuss, there was a problem, political problem. We try to fix it, and that's what we got. So happy Canada Day, yay! I'm kidding.
Thank you, Pascal. Pascal, are you able to take everyone else off of mute?
I'm working on it right
now.
I'm going to be unmuting every one of you, if it works.
Okay, so I'm going to, if anybody has any questions, I can't really see the chats currently the way I have the phone set up. So you could feel free to just jump in and ask the question that should pop into your mind.
Yeah. If you could go into chat, I'm going to open the chat one sec.
Oh, you can see the chats, Pascal? Okay, so you can mediate that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to try. I'm trying to unmute. It's kind of taking some time.
Well, I was able to hear Jerry just now.
Yeah.
Oh,
There should be an option to unmute all.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
So, Pascal, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that Papineau had a very different idea about the revolution. Like, he would not have wanted it to get violent, at least not as soon as it did. I didn't realize that. I appreciate you going through that. And you described how his colleague, whose name is escaping me, Nelson, I believe you said?
Well, there was Nelson. There was also Callahan. But yeah, Nelson was the one that went for violent armed rebellion. Okay,
do you think that Nelson, since it seems like he was a bit of a Jacobin, like he really skipped steps and you could, it seems like you laid out the case that his violent actions so soon in the game really sabotaged this potential. Would you say that he could have been a controlled asset, or do you think that he was just a hothead?
Well, that's certainly an hypothesis which I'm ready to entertain. He came from a very British background. Actually, Nelson, maybe you know about the Battle of Trafalgar and the Admiral Nelson. That was his family. He came from that family. Yeah. He lived most of his life next to a British garrison fort around Chambly, I believe. The Fort Chambly. And I'm trying to still unmute everybody, sorry. And at a certain point, he discovered that he was really sympathetic to the French Canadians. And so he joined the Patriot Party. I don't know. You tell me if that sounds weird, but I don't see it.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Pascal, Jerry.
I'm unmuting everybody. It should work.
Jerry Therier does have a question.
Yeah, I wasn't really finished on Nelson.
Oh, yeah. Finish your thought. Please.
I'm sorry.
Please do.
It would be for a different class, a different presentation. But Nelson also, the issue is that when Papineau was in exile, Nelson also, he had to, I think that he was deported. He was arrested and deported, but somehow he was able to escape and he came back to Lower Canada. Eventually, he's going to become the first mayor of Montreal. And also, when Papineau comes back, he's going to be launching a big attack on him, saying that basically he left and he was just a chicken. He chickened out. He didn't want to stay for the battle. So that's for a different presentation, but I would say he didn't chicken out. But his idea of a rebellion was clearly not the same as Nelson's. Yes, Jerry?
Oh, Pascal, you answered my question there on Nelson.
Oh,
because
okay.
In the 1848-49, he really came out attacking Papineau, said he was a coward.
Yeah.
And when the shooting started, he ran away. It was really disgusting. So I really don't like this Nelson guy. Something smells rotten there. But the other thing I wanted to ask is, I remember reading that Papineau originally, I don't know, maybe in the 1830s, his idea was to have like a boycott of British goods.
Yeah.
Because I know that's what they did in the American Revolution. Ben Franklin was part of that. Before the revolution started, they just boycotted buying anything that came from Britain, non-importation. That's what they were doing. So that's all I know. But if you know more about that with Papineau, that would show the difference between him and Nelson. He wanted to melt the spoons.
Yeah. Yeah, it's problematic because, I mean, I wanted to go more into the economics, but it's scarce. There's not that much on it. It's really there was a big influence of the British liberal thinking, and so Adam Smith and all that. And so at the same time, Lower Canada, Upper Canada, they wanted to have more freedom to exchange. But in Lower Canada, they also wanted to keep a bit of the old system from the French system, and so it wasn't really, so much freedom. It was a bit tricky, and the American economic system, the American system as we know it, from Hamilton, was not really understood. I know for a fact that Papineau didn't really understand it because in his speeches, it's not, he references 1776, but it's, after that, what do we do? It's not so clear, he wanted to fight much more on the political level. That's what I get.
I'd like to follow up.
He was not so solid. Yes, Jim.
Can I follow up on that? Because that's what I was wondering about in that dialogue between Papineau and Bathurst, where Papineau says, apparently referring to the American system that Canada or parts of Canada could be part of, that Congress could not become tyrannical. I assume by Congress he means the federal government generally, and that as only has power over war with foreigners and over foreign trade. That clearly is not the case. And especially as time went on, it would become less and less the case that that individual entities would have such a high degree of self-government, and only such powers would be delegated to the federal government. Was he just ignorant of how the United States actually ran itself? And it's hard to believe that he would think that Lower Canada would have more rights as part of the United States than it did as part of Canada, and certainly the case today.
Well, it's a good point. I agree. I think clearly he does make references to Jefferson more. So that was his approach.
Yeah.
While he was dealing with, at the time, it's true. You have, reality is that most of the French Canadians were farmers, and Jefferson, was more of a landlord. So Papineau was actually a landlord himself. So even though he wanted to change the political system, he didn't necessarily want to cut his leg doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that almost he had a Jeffersonian concept of what a federation of states would look like, which was settled in the negative in 1865. In other words, it was not that kind of confederation we ended up with.
You're right. That's exactly it. I'm not sure exactly. I have a friend who's been looking into all of the newspapers before the rebellions. He's doing his master on one of them, but it's not always clear. I mean, there's a lot of references to the Declaration of Independence. There's references to the Constitution, but it's not really so clear as to what kind of information was getting here from the United States at the time, and how it would be comprehended. Because really, like up until 1812, and a bit later than that, really, like, people here really wanted to be British, in a sense. They really wanted to belong and be part of the institutions, have equal rights as British subjects in England, which I don't know what they knew about the situation in England either. It was, communication. As I said, communication is a big deal. And the empire really tried to prevent any kind of means of communication. I kind of skipped the part on the railroads, but that's also an issue, There's development at the beginning of the first half of the 19th century. You have development of railroads a bit everywhere. And in the United States, big time, there's a lot of development in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. In Lower Canada, it's really going to happen around 1847. It's not really going to start before that. There's going to be like one railroad system installed before that in 36, but it's going to be seasonal. So it's not going to be, for all year long. It's just going to be for, when there's no snow, no ice, to get from one point to another to help the ships unload. It's not really, it's not for internal development. It's just to help the one trading. But trading with whom? Well, trading with the motherland. So that's Great Britain. So we want to take stuff, send it to Great Britain, whether it's fur at the beginning and then timber after that. So you're
Pascal.
right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I remember a while ago we had a chance to go to the Chateau Ramsey where Ben Franklin stayed in the old port of Montreal, and now it's a museum. And there was one room with I remember letters and a draft banknote being prepared by some of the allies of Papineau in Quebec for a People's Republic Bank. And I was wondering if you knew anything about that movement to create a bank. And I remember some of these references were discussing the need to cultivate manufacturers in Quebec using this type of new, I guess it looked and it sounded to me at least like a Hamiltonian approach to development and banking. Did you encounter anything like that along your researches so far that could follow up or elaborate on that movement? Who was leading it? What it was?
Yeah, I had a little bit, but I kind of just tried to, not really go too much into it because I know there's a book that I wanted from the library and I couldn't access it. So I was tempted to mention stuff, but I didn't really want to, put my foot in my mouth at the same time, not remembering well exactly what I read in the past. But you're right, there was an attempt. There were different attempts. But, like the Bank of Montreal was founded back in the 1810s, I think, run by the Molsons. And, basically like the clique, the oligarchy, Scottish and British merchants. And there were different little banks, but it was mostly tied to that, to like, the Molson Brewery, or I think even, but see, that's where, I'm kind of, putting my leg right now. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure, but I think, I'm going to say that, but I can be completely wrong right now. I think that Nelson, the Nelson brothers, I think they had a bank at a certain point. I'm not exactly sure. It's something I wanted to dig more into, but I couldn't find the information. And it's the times that we're in right now. It's kind of hard to get access to good books anyway. So yeah, but there were attempts to create other banks by the Patriot movement, but I don't think it worked long because you needed people that were connected to the government to do this. You needed to already have like something going, kind of like a commercial enterprise. But if you didn't, like, how would you back your currency? Right. Yeah, that was a big issue. That's why, if they had known about the American system more, it could have helped to set up different things. But I'm gonna put it on ignorance. I think they just didn't know it. At least from what I've read from them, it doesn't appear in their speeches.
I think Scott has something he wanted to add to this discussion. Scott?
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm checking the chat, but yeah, Scott?
Scott, you can speak.
Oh, okay, yeah, the bank, you got it. Right.
What's he saying?
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna read it. He says, further to Matt's question, I found some info on a Republican Bank of Canada. The Republican Bank, that's quote, the Republican Bank of Canada was formed on this basis. Dr. Charles Duncombe was the author of Duncombe's Free Banking, an essay on banking, currency, finance, exchanges, and political economy, and memorial to Congress upon the subject of Republican free banking. Oh, and there was an attempt from the Flash. Okay, that was a kind of a Masonic lodge that was created, or a secret society which was created from the lower Canadians who went to the United States, tried to organize the second uprising. It was heavily infiltrated by British agents, though. Yeah. So yeah, there were ideas around at the time, but I never really saw anything that what was so that would bring me tears of joy. I've never seen anything that would be like such a great application of Hamiltonian economics in lower or upper Canada. It's too bad. Yeah, that's today was not exactly a presentation on heroes. Not exactly. But it's something that I think we need to know if we want to understand what happened and what we're doing, what we're going to be doing from now on, to correct that. Oh, is that you're sending more stuff? I think, Scott. Oh, okay. I guess you have a question on the Declaration of Independence. Oh, this laptop is running low. The battery might die. Do you have the connection for the battery might die? Oh, is that it? This one?
That's for this one.
Christine's on it. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. If you had a question on the Declaration of Independence from 38, sorry. Yes, that was done by Robert Nelson. So, the brother of the other Nelson, Wilfred. And although it really looks good, like you can read it and you can be inspired by it. I know that's what happened to me when I first read it. After a while, when you look at the Nelsons and you kind of wonder, what they were doing and all of this, it becomes kind of a sham. Because it's like there's lots which is translated from the Declaration of Independence, but like in 1838, you're in the United States, you're exiled in the United States, and you declare independence. You go back and you get your ass kicked, and nobody wants to hear about your independence. Well. It was a nice idea, but So I think it's kind of a desperate move, and also it's clear that in this declaration, he does completely abolish the land tenure, the landlordship, what we called seigneur in Lower Canada. It was from the French system. That's what Papineau was, a seigneur. So he owned land and people worked for him on that land. Basically almost like serfs, so Robert Nelson, when he declared independence, would abolish all of this. So I see that as a move to basically say, if we win, clearly, Papineau, you're out, which is going to take everything from you, which, I don't think was a good idea. But it shows that, yes, they had more of that Jacobin impulse to them. They just wanted to burn, trash the system. But in the end, they didn't do it. Robert Nelson never came back to Canada. He stayed in the U.S. I don't know exactly why. Maybe actually he was very sincere in his declaration of independence and decided not to come back until it would become a free republic. But Wilfred Nestle is going to come back, and he's going to be in charge of, he's going to be inspector of the jails, he's going to be mayor of Montreal, he's going to be elected again, and he's going to be trashing Papineau's reputation. So that's, it goes back, these guys, the Nelsons, I don't really trust them for all of this.
Yeah, some of the research I uncovered, that it's talked about, which I was surprised at, was the collaborate, or this underground thing, I guess, these exiled guys, patriots, and but it went into some bit about the plot to counterattack and from the U.S. and coordination with other forces in the U.S. it seemed, and patriotic forces, and to create a successful revolution there. But I think it was, sounds like quite a British operation from start to finish.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that, actually there's different things, it's always hard to try to, stay focused. There's so many things to bring in, but Papineau and O'Callaghan, that's what they're going to be doing also, mainly what they're going to be in the United States. They're going to be trying to organize the U.S. Leadership to join, to support, but they're not going to have much, so nothing pretty much. They're going to be able to raise a bit of funds here and there, giving presentations, but there's going to be this event in Upper Canada, the Caroline incident, I think it's called, where basically the Americans were sympathetic, at least the people on the border were very sympathetic to the Lower Canadians and Upper Canadians and their rebellion, up until the time where there was a U.S. ship which was taken, burned, and sent over the Niagara Falls to its destruction. And that at that point, Van Buren, the President Van Buren, basically that's where he steps in and he says, okay, any American helping the Canadians is going to be thrown in jail. So that's where everything kind of stops. There's still Americans who are sympathetic, but they can't do as much, and the military is actually sent in Vermont, I believe, and in New York State on the border to try to keep things calm. So it's much harder for anybody to do anything. And at that point, basically, you're not going to get any support coming from the U.S. Congress or any legislature, So that's in 38. Yeah.
And so the role of Van Buren is quite substantial in defeating, you could say.
Yeah, clearly. If you had a better leadership in the United States, well, who knows what could have happened? But
well, I mean, from what I've read of Jackson and then Van Buren, I mean, it's just what Jackson did, and then Van Buren's. I mean, it's a ruthless attack on the Republic, which leads to, I mean, like Jackson's dismantling of the second bank of the United States sets the precondition for the Civil War. But it's rapacious. I mean, it just ramps up into high gear under Van Buren. It was two terms, and then I think his successor as well. And were quite. But one thing that another aspect I think of this that comes to mind is what you mentioned there. 1837. There's economic troubles.
Yeah.
In the United States, and this intrigues me because I want to know more, because this led to the gold rush, right? The 1849ers on the West Coast, the San Franciscan coming up, and Spanish and whatnot, and what mostly, brought a lot of American immigration to the West Coast, and then what would become a drive for annexation to the United States under Governor Seymour. But what I don't, what's intriguing is the gold rush started by a decline in American currency, and I think it is, and gold becomes more dear. And I'm intrigued to find out how, I guess how the British create that. What are they doing that's creating the attack on the American currency, and what would be then I think the troubles between the first bank and the second bank of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Well, these are good questions. I'm not sure I can answer
right.
For this presentation. I have no idea really, but that's certainly interesting.
It's probably also plays a role in the lack of organization of the Papineau rebellions. I would bet as well. Mm-hmm. But
yeah,
but I also just
was an issue of that. There was an issue of preparation there. I mean, there were things which were said which made sense, but in the end, if you don't have more, logistics behind you, I mean, I think there were a lot of infiltrations. That's one thing. Also, well, you have the Nelsons, but you had other people, and that's something that came out much more in the 1870s, 80s. There were different plays that were written, especially and discussing the flee of Papineau and calling him a coward. But in one of these pieces, it's a theater play. It discusses this guy, Félix Poutré, who was basically a British informer. He was planted there, and he would basically just give whatever the meetings point were for the Patriots and this and that, and try to give false intel to the Patriots. And when he was arrested, the way he was able to actually get out was to fake complete insanity. So yeah, it's a very it's a very important moment in our history, and most people don't necessarily see it like that. And but maybe it's one of these cases where there was a great it could have been better planned, would have been better with greater ideas, and the people was too small, too little. not thinking about, greater issues. A bit like, the case of 1774, what Matt has discussed. It was not a great experiment. Let's put it like that. It could have been, but there were problems, different aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of ironic, considering the efforts of Colbert in New France. And that's kind of the missing piece for, I can say for Western Canadians, because they don't know anything about that. But there's there is an impulse for development and whatnot from, that's the legacy that should be shined a light upon. And it's tragic that those groupings from that legacy weren't missed the mark and didn't join a higher cause, and that they were subverted from that, right? So that's quite intriguing to me, and to know more about the influence of Colbert in New France, and I think that's probably where this the strong impulses for development come from.
Pascal,
yeah,
could you and that's a good point, Scott. That's actually really, I think, very good, very insightful. But I think that also touches on what some of the stuff that Pascal is going to discuss in his sequel, which we have to discuss what date would be the best for making that happen. I love the idea of following up on the story with a greater overview of the life of Louis Antoine de Sol, who I think you've described to me was the nephew, right, of Papineau?
Papineau, yeah. And his story, even though, it doesn't necessarily change the story of Canada from what we know politically speaking, the institutions, his attempt, his work, well, no, I'm going to completely erase what I just said. His work actually changed the history of Canada in ways that we don't really well comprehend today, because he was kind of erased from history. That's the real issue. But he was a very optimistic guy who tried different things to actually develop Lower Canada. And sometimes it's not so much that you don't have good ideas, but you have a system. As I tried to show that in the presentation. It's not so much that you had bad people or bad intentions, or you didn't know what to do really to develop the country, but it's really that you had a system which was put there, imposed on you, that would just not allow it. It would not allow any development. It would not allow means of communication. That was the intention, that was the British system that was created in British North America, really was one to make sure that rebellions or revolutions like the one in the United States would not occur here. And they were able to pit the French against the English and the Irish and the Scottish and the, and the black and the white and the yellow and purple and everybody else, whatever creed. They were able to separate people and people's interests in all of these categories to make sure that, there would not be a real cohesion. People would not get together on a higher principle. It would be very hard. And that's also why, to a certain extent, it's also why, their rebellions happened around Montreal, like the map that I showed you. For Lower Canada, it mainly happened around Montreal. There were no fights in Quebec. There were no fights elsewhere around Montreal. That's where people were involved and had more Republican ideas, that's where they were. It's not that you had bad people in Quebec, but they were just not so much involved into the politics of what was going on in Montreal and around. So to a certain extent, they were maybe a bit more, you know, on the conservative side, maybe. Some authors have been saying that. I guess so, you know, to a certain extent. But it's really that it was two different worlds also. It was not meant to be, you know, a real cohesive whole. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a house divided at odds with itself. When you have the oligarchical and the democratic institutions that are sort of forced together, you can't, that's an unsound foundation. It's never going to work. I was hoping maybe before we close out, would you be able to say a little bit more as a teaser for how you're maybe thinking a little bit about your sequel class in a bit more detail to whet people's appetites? What type of ideas you plan on maybe introducing?
Yeah, good point. Because I didn't really cover so much the Upper Canada Rebellion. I would like to touch a bit more on that, and that's you know, an obvious thing. As you know, I like to talk a lot, and had a very big PowerPoint. So it took me longer than I thought. So I would like to go back. Well, as you know, whenever we talk about a subject, we have to go back. So if I talk about after the rebellion, I'm going to have to talk to you about the rebellion. So I would like to go back and talk it, you know, tell you about the rebellions and what happened a bit more in details in Upper Canada, and discuss what were the figures that emerged after the rebellions. What was kind of like the political arrangement that was created in Upper. Well, now we have the Union, so we're going to have Canada East and Canada West. That's how it's going to be called anyway. But we're going to have the Union. So how does it work under the Union? And does it really change anything in terms of development? And so on the Canada East, which is today Quebec, you will have people like Louis-Antoine Desaules, and you're going to have a political party which is going to be created called Les Rouges, the Reds. And on the other side, in Canada West, I would like to actually look at a character named Isaac Buchanan, because I think he was really the one pushing for development before Confederation. So this is what I would like to look at. You know, the people who wanted development, who wanted, you know, something greater than what happened under the Union. So that's what I would, you know. So let's see how I pull that out.
That's great. Thank you, Pascal. I think
Yeah.
Kathleen saying, Kathleen.
She's just saying thank you.
Oh, saying thank you. Okay. Yeah. That's,
All right.
Pascal,
Take care.
thanks a lot.
Kathleen.
It was very informative.
Thanks, Assad.
cool. So next week, we're going to have Jerry Therrien, who's going to elaborate on some of the things that Pascal had touched upon, especially around this 1800 to 1804 period with the fight of Toussaint Louverture. How and why did Haiti become the world's second republic after the United States? What role did Alexander Hamilton play and other patriots play in that process? And what were the global dynamics of the time that are totally underappreciated today? So Jerry, who has just written a 4th volume of his book, will be going through that. And so I'm hoping that everybody can tune in next Sunday at 4 p.m. again for a continuation of this story. So thank you everyone for coming on today.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Merci,
Thanks, Pascal.
Thanks.
Merci, Pascal.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Merci. See ya. Take care.
From his canoe and full of tears would roam countries that strangers claim, and full of tears would roam countries that strangers claim. If you my land should see, my so unhappy land, say to my friends from me, they in my memory stand. Say to my friends from me, they in my memory stand. Un Canadien errant, banni de ses foyers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers. Si tu vois mon pays malheureux, va dire à mes amis que je me souviens d'eux. Va dire à mes amis